Have you ever noticed this incredibly bizarre contradiction that's just sort of operating in the background of your daily life right now?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Right. Like, on the one hand, if you try to order a specific physical product, say, I don't know, a custom piece of furniture or a really specialized replacement part for your car, it feels like stepping into a casino.
Yeah, it's a total gamble.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
constantly dealing with these completely opaque supply chain delays, or shipping schedules that just change overnight, or components that are mysteriously out of stock for 6 months.
And nobody can tell you why.
No one. The physical world just feels increasingly sluggish and, unpredictable. But then, on that exact same day, you open up one of your digital apps or you query a new AI tool, and the experience is insanely fast.
Oh, it's completely frictionless.
Right. It practically anticipates what you want before your fingers even finish typing.
Yeah, it is a really striking contrast. And
Hmm.
we're seeing that it's actually far more than just a minor inconvenience for consumers. It
Mhm.
really appears to be a structural reality of the global operating environment you're living in right now.
Okay, let's unpack this because that underlying contradiction is basically the entire mission of our deep dive today. And we have a really compelling stack of source material to help us look at it.
We do, yeah.
We're drawing from a theoretical thesis called ECP-12, and we're pairing that with a pretty unique analytical framework known as LMOS version 1.1.
Right. The LMOS framework.
Yeah, and we'll get into the mechanics of both of these, but at a high level, LMOS is this tool designed to observe complex global systems by basically filtering out the daily news cycle.
It ignores the surface noise.
Exactly. It focuses purely on the hidden machinery. We are looking for how the world actually runs underneath the headlines.
Because the surface noise in global media can just be overwhelming, right? It makes it really difficult to spot the actual systemic shifts. But by applying the LMOS framework, we can kind of peel that back, look at the underlying structures, and begin to see a pattern.
And when you look through that structural lens, you see the core mystery we want to explore today. Like, global energy instability is undeniably rising, and physical logistics networks are showing deep, deep signs of wear.
Yeah, the physical strain is obvious.
But yet, simultaneously, you have this massive capital investment into artificial intelligence and computational infrastructure, and it's accelerating at this unprecedented rate. So the question is, why are these two things happening at the exact same time?
I mean, it may very well be the defining economic question of this decade.
Really? You think it's that big?
I do, yeah. And to approach it, the LMOS framework suggests we apply what it calls core field A.
Core field A. Okay, what is that?
So, this principle requires us to prioritize structure over impression. We have to examine what they call the operational system layer, the underlying OS of the economy, rather than the narrative layer that completely dominates the financial press.
Okay, so let's ground that OS layer in the concrete reality of our sources, because the documentation paints a pretty stark picture of the physical world right now.
It really does.
We're observing literal wear and tear on the infrastructure. If you look at global shipping, there are these persistent tensions and reroutings in critical maritime choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz, for example.
Right, physical bottlenecks.
And in the energy sector, we're seeing profound constraints on refinery capacities. We're even starting to see these localized, persistent shortages of middle distillates, that's diesel fuel and jet fuel.
Which are crucial.
Yeah, they are the absolute foundational liquids of physical movement and global trade.
Yeah, and those physical constraints introduce massive uncertainty into any financial model. The physical world is just inherently slow. And, when you introduce strain into an already slow system, you basically just compound the friction.
But then, okay, you pan the camera over to the digital realm, and the contrast is just jarring.
It's totally different.
Right. At the exact same moment that international shipping is struggling to safely navigate these physical straits, you have billion-dollar capital allocations being signed overnight for massive AI data centers.
Billions, just instantly.
Yeah, and you have these tech conglomerates securing unprecedented dedicated connections to regional power grids just to fuel computation. We are essentially witnessing a computational boom occurring right in the dead center of a physical slump.
Exactly. And the immediate narrative level assumption is often that the financial markets have simply become irrational.
Right, like they're just chasing a bubble.
Exactly. That investors are just ignoring the physical crisis in favor of chasing a shiny new technology trend. But the LMO framework points to something much more profound.
Okay.
The markets are not ignoring the physical crisis. It seems they have actually begun operating on an entirely different set of coordinates.
Okay, wait. I want to push back on that idea of different coordinates for a second. Because if I'm an institutional investor, right, and I'm pouring $10 billion into a new AI data center, I am still heavily reliant on the physical world.
Well, sure.
I need thousands of tons of physical copper, steel, concrete. I need millions of gallons of physical water just for the cooling systems. And obviously, I need a massive amount of physical electricity.
You do, yeah.
So how can capital truly bypass the physical realm when computation requires so much heavy physical infrastructure?
That is a really crucial distinction to make. Capital isn't escaping the physical world entirely. I mean, that's impossible, like you said.
Right.
What it is doing, though, is shifting where the actual value generation and the problem solving occur. According to the ECP-12 thesis, there's a fundamental structural rule regarding capital allocation.
And what's that rule?
Capital always flows toward what they call tractable domains.
Tractable domains, okay, meaning areas where a system can actually be managed, smoothed out, and organized efficiently.
Yes. And more specifically, it's about areas where a financial intention can reliably translate into a predictable result.
Oh.
Think about the physical realm you just described, the logistics networks, the energy extraction, the raw resources. This realm is fundamentally intractable. It is highly uncertain, and crucially, it is nonlinear.
Right, and in a nonlinear system, cause and effect just get entirely distorted. A minor input can create a massive chaotic output.
That is the core issue. In the physical world, a localized disruption, say, an unforeseen storm in the Atlantic, or a geopolitical dispute over a tiny border region, or literally a single container ship running aground in a vital canal.
It distorts the entire global supply chain.
Exactly. It ripples out in ways that simply cannot be perfectly modeled or controlled. So if an infrastructure fund attempts to guarantee a 10-year return on a new physical port terminal, their financial intention gets completely warped by the unpredictable drag of physical reality.
Because you can have the absolute best financial model in the world, but if the concrete pour is delayed by 6 months due to a labor strike, or the diesel fuel needed to run the cranes triples in price, your model just blows up.
It blows up, and that extreme variance makes massive tools of capital incredibly nervous.
Yeah, I bet.
Now, contrast that operational environment with the computational world. AI, software ecosystems, high-frequency finance. This domain operates at a completely different speed. It is capable of millisecond recursion.
Millisecond recursion.
Yeah.
So basically, because a computational system can run a process, analyze the output, and instantly adjust its next iteration thousands of times a second, it doesn't really need to be perfectly predictive from the start.
Exactly. It allows the system to be probabilistic rather than deterministic.
Yeah.
In physical infrastructure, you have to try and control every single variable, which is just impossible.
Right.
But in the computational realm, you treat outcomes as statistical distributions.
Right.
If a digital algorithm encounters an error, the system tweaks the weights and runs it again instantly. You cannot instantly iterate the construction of an oil refinery.
Oh, no, you definitely can't. So wait, what does this all mean then? It sounds like we are looking at a scenario where a capital allocation committee has a choice, right?
Yeah.
They can either try to fix a crumbling, entirely unpredictable highway system where a single pothole or, a weather event cascades into thousands of delayed trucks.
Right.
Or they can take that exact same capital and build a hyper-fast, frictionless virtual environment where those physical variables don't even exist.
Right.
And they are choosing the virtual. So capital is essentially just giving up on reality.
What's fascinating here is how clearly the sources actually validate that exact intuition. The central thesis of ECP-12 is that capital is not flowing into AI to solve physical constraints, it is optimizing to bypass them.
Wow.
It is a structural shift toward avoidance over resolution.
Avoidance over resolution. That is, wow. So the billions and billions pouring into artificial intelligence aren't fundamentally aimed at fixing the global supply chain or solving the diesel shortage.
No.
They're aimed at building economic models and value generation engines that just do not rely on those physical bottlenecks in the first place.
Exactly. And the LMOS framework provides a very specific vocabulary for this mechanism. It analyzes systems using time pressure and OS speed gradients.
Gradients, like physics.
Yeah, like physics. Capital behaves much like a physical force seeking the path of least resistance. It flows where the speed of execution isn't bogged down by friction.
Makes sense.
So when you have a global environment where the physical operational system is choked by geopolitical and material friction, and the digital operational system offers frictionless iteration, capital simply rushes into the fast layer.
But I mean, this completely flips the traditional narrative on its head,
Yeah,
doesn't
it
it?
does, yeah.
Because we usually interpret a massive boom in technology investment as a sign of incredible optimism. We view it as this pure, unadulterated economic growth. But reading through ECP-12, the implications here seem, I don't know, much darker.
They certainly point toward a different interpretation. The acceleration of AI investment may not actually be proof of pure economic growth in the traditional holistic sense.
Okay.
Instead, it seems to be the reciprocal effect of a fundamental decrease in trust toward physical reality.
A structural decrease in
Yeah.
trust. So, as the physical world proves itself to be less reliable and more prone to these cascading failures, capital simply stops trusting it to deliver returns.
Exactly. And the ECP-12 document outlines these gradients of retreat by tracking some very specific correlations.
Mm.
It notes that as global energy markets become more unstable and unpredictable, investment in abstract AI models actively increases.
Because if you can't guarantee the physical energy to manufacture and ship physical goods globally, you pivot to generating value through data, which requires a smaller, more concentrated footprint of energy that you can directly secure.
Precisely. Furthermore, the source observes that as maritime and overland logistics become more uncertain, the premium placed on data itself skyrockets.
Wow, okay.
As the real world becomes harder and harder to read through traditional modeling, these hyperfast computational simulations are preferred over physical prototyping,
It's literally a systemic retreat into the virtual layer.
which leads to a profound structural consequence for the global economy. The world is bifurcating. It's splitting into two distinct parallel layers of operation.
Right. The sources refer to this as the upper layer and the lower layer. The upper layer is the fast OS, so that's artificial intelligence, computational capital, automated high-speed finance.
And the lower layer is the slow reality. This encompasses energy extraction, maritime logistics, heavy manufacturing, agriculture, and, daily human life.
Because ultimately, we are physical beings. You and I, and everyone listening, we have to eat physical food, we have to sleep in physical structures, and travel across physical distances. We can't just upload our biological needs into the fast OS layer.
We can't. We remain entirely dependent on the lower layer. And this brings us to one of the most critical mechanical concepts from the LMOS framework, the dynamic of speed and shear.
Shear. Yeah, that's an interesting term here. I want to make sure we don't just leave that as a vague physics metaphor. What does economic shear actually look like? We aren't talking about tectonic plates grinding together here.
No, not tectonic plates. To understand shear in an economic context, we have to look at the boundaries between these two layers. The fast OS and the slow reality are not isolated, right? They are deeply interconnected.
Right, because the AI data center still require the physical electricity generated by the lower layer.
Exactly. And the hyperfast algorithmic trading systems still dictate the pricing of the physical wheat and copper being moved in the lower layer.
But the digital layer is processing decisions at the speed of fiber optics, while the physical layer is moving at the speed of, like, a literal cargo ship.
Right. And when two deeply connected operational systems are forced to interact while moving at vastly different speeds, it creates structural friction.
Okay, I see.
Think of an engine where the drive shaft is attempting to spin at 10,000 revolutions per minute. But the transmission it connects to is totally rusted and can only turn at 10 revolutions per minute. The energy from the drive shaft doesn't simply vanish. It converts into heat.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. So in our economy, that heat isn't thermal. It's systemic stress.
In economic terms, this shear manifests as highly localized inflation spikes. It looks like sudden, totally inexplicable inventory gluts in one sector, followed immediately by severe shortages in another.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it manifests as massive volatility in bond markets that are tied to physical infrastructure, because the high-speed financial layer is demanding rapid returns from a physical layer that structurally just cannot move any faster.
And the LMS framework stresses that the speed mismatch cannot easily be rectified, right? You can't magically optimize a deep water port to operate at the speed of a data center. So this economic friction just accumulates silently in the background.
The critical insight from the sources is that this systemic heat does not dissipate on its own. It builds up along the boundary lines between the digital abstraction and the physical reality.
Okay.
And once that accumulation of stress crosses a certain threshold, probabilistic models suggest it is highly likely to manifest as sudden, nonlinear disruptions in the real world.
You know, if you are listening to this, you might be trying to map this massive structural theory onto your own life. You might be thinking, okay, capital is retreating to tractable domains, economic shear is generating systemic heat, but how does this actually show up for me on a regular Tuesday?
It often shows up in the subtle, everyday cognitive dissonance that many people have simply started to accept as the new normal.
Bringing it back to the contradiction we started with at the beginning of the deep dive, it's that jarring experience of holding a glass and metal supercomputer in your hand that can, generate a photorealistic video from a text prompt in 10 seconds.
Right.
But you cannot figure out why your local pharmacy has been out of a basic physical medication for 3 weeks.
The source material captures this psychological impact quite well, actually. It points to the subtle delivery delays that become normalized, the slight but persistent price fluctuations at the grocery store that don't really seem tied to any major news event.
Right.
It is that lingering modern feeling that no specific massive problem has occurred today, but you still do not feel completely secure in the systems around you.
It's like a low-grade, persistent hum of vulnerability. It's the realization that the physical floorboards of the economy feel slightly rotten, even while the digital ceiling above us is being painted with increasingly beautiful, high-definition clouds.
That sensory experience is what it feels like to live on the boundary of those two layers. You're experiencing the accumulation of shear. Your digital life is scrolling perfectly smoothly because the fast OS layer is hyper-optimized to keep you engaged. Meanwhile, the slow reality layer, the infrastructure that actually purifies your water and brings packages to your door, is under immense compounding strain.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really requires a fundamental shift in how we navigate our personal and professional lives. I mean, the ECP-12 thesis implies that debating which layer is right or wrong is just missing the point entirely.
It is.
The capital shift toward avoidance is happening. It is a structural reality of the boardrooms and financial institutions shaping the next decade.
Which raises an important question for you, the listener, to actively consider. The challenge is no longer about predicting the shift. It's about auditing your own dependencies.
You have to map out exactly where your daily existence relies on the lower layer, the physical supply chains, the local energy grid, the tangible logistics, versus where you derive your income or utility from the computational upper layer.
Because the computational world may feel incredibly robust right now, flush with capital and accelerating innovation. But you cannot consume code for sustenance, and you cannot shelter inside a localized data environment.
No, you definitely can't. It is entirely about situational awareness. It's like knowing exactly where the lifeboats are positioned on a massive ship that is currently spending all of its maintenance budget upgrading the first-class entertainment system while the engine room slowly takes on water.
That's exactly it.
You don't need to panic, but you absolutely need to understand the structural integrity of the vessel you are traveling on.
And the LMO's framework encourages us to observe these shifts without alarmism or moral framing. Capital is simply doing what capital is programmed to do. It is optimizing for tractability. It is seeking environments where intentions yield predictable results. And right now, that means avoiding the friction of physical reality.
But the friction of reality remains. The physical world does not cease to require maintenance simply because the financial markets have decided to stop looking at it.
And that tension is the core dynamic driving the next phase of global development. We've seen how the LMO's framework exposes this structural bifurcation. We've seen the ECP-12 thesis explain the mechanics of why capital chooses avoidance over resolution, pouring resources into the fast OS while leaving the slow reality to wear down.
Right.
And we have explored how that speed mismatch generates economic shear.
Which leaves us staring down a massive unresolved horizon. As we wrap up this deep dive today, we want to leave you with 3 massive open-ended questions to consider. And the first 2 are drawn directly from the core of our sources today.
As capital continues its relentless retreat into tractable digital domains, distancing itself further and further from physical constraints, who actually remains to maintain the physical reality we all depend on?
And second, as that economic friction, that silent heat, continues to accumulate along the boundary layers, when all of this high-speed computational decision-making finally has to collide with the uncompromising limits of the physical world, will it arrive as a gentle, managed adjustment or a complete structural rupture?
But there is a third question that emerges when you look at the logical endpoint of this entire system.
Right. What happens if the ultimate consequence of this retreat isn't just that the physical world degrades, but that the computational world becomes a hyper-financialized fortress? If the physical constraints become so severe, if energy and raw materials become so incredibly scarce, will the physical world eventually reprice the computational layer's very existence, locking out anyone who hasn't secured their own independent physical resources?
It suggests the illusion of bypassing reality may have a very hard expiration date.
It really does. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep observing the world through these structural layers, keep questioning the coordinates of the systems around you, and pay attention to where the friction builds.
Until next time.
When the cloud finally comes crashing back down to Earth, wait, what happens to the ground?